Hello everybody, this is Much Yu-Gi-Oh! Coming at you with a deck profile from Quentin Michael. Quentin, what are you playing today?
Today we're playing a budget Battlin Boxer deck.
Alright, let's see what you got.
Alright, so this deck is a fairly affordable deck. A lot of these cards are commons and they're fairly easy to find and at an affordable rate here. So you're going to start off with your Battlin Boxin Headgeared. He's really one of the key Battlin Boxers monsters in this deck. When he's normal summoned, he allows you to pitch one of your Battlin Boxers to your graveyard, which is very useful when played in combination with your next Boxer monster, that is Battlin Boxer Glassjaw. Now, Glassjaw, when sent to the graveyard by card effect, allows you to add a Battlin Boxer monster from your graveyard to your hand. Also, his effect is if he's targeted for an attack, he immediately destroys himself, allowing him to proc his effect whenever he's attacked. Glassjaw is really key in getting out some of your bigger Battlin Boxer monsters back from your graveyard to your hand, allowing you to get into more combo plays into your big monster Lead Yoke, which we'll discuss later. I also play a playset of Battlin Boxer Counter Punch. He's sort of a poor man's Honest within this deck. Whenever a Battlin Boxing monster you control is attacked or attacks, you can banish him from your hand or graveyard, and that Battlin Boxing monster gains 1,000 attack for the battle phase. He's also a good target when you're pitching monsters for Headgeared because it does allow for a little bit of extra protection for any Battlin Boxer monster you control. Some might recommend playing two. I prefer a playset, but it is a matter of preference there. So one that you might want to experiment with when building this deck. I also recommend a playset of Battlin Boxing Sparer. His effect is you can special summon him from your hand when you possess a Battlin Boxing monster. This will allow you basically to spam out rank 4s, which is really the purpose of this deck. You can't conduct battle during that turn, but it's really a small cost to get out many of the rank 4s that you're going to be playing. And he's also just another target for pitching or adding back to your hand with Glassjaw's effect. You can tech one Battlin Boxer Ribgardna. He's one of the new Battlin Boxers to come out in the most recent Shadow Specters set. You can banish him from your hand or graveyard just like Counterpunch and remove one of your boxers from play till your next standby. Really, the cost of taking some damage in one battle phase can be worth it if it means you can get out a Lead Yoke the next turn. So this card can be useful. Teching one, I think, would be at max what you'd want to do. Maybe side one more, but it's really not crucial in the deck. And then we come out to your biggest boxer monster, and that is Switch Hitter. He's going to be the one getting you into most of your Lead Yoke plays. When you normal summon Switch Hitter, you can special summon a boxer monster from your graveyard to the field. So really, he's an instant rank 4 monster, and you have to special summon a boxer, but really, that's preferable because you're going to go into Lead Yoke 90% of the time as is. So he's one that you might consider if you have a first term Headgeared, pitching him so that way you can get Glassjaw in your graveyard. Getting into Switch Hitter is really the most crucial play in this deck, so that way you can get out those Lead Yokes. As for your non-boxer monsters, you're really only going to be playing a few. Fencing Fire Ferret is one that I would certainly consider playing, because when he's destroyed, you can target a monster your opponent controls and destroy that, and inflict 500 damage to your opponent. It's also a fire monster, which will be useful when I explain later on, and it's also a level 4. The same goes for Blue Flame Swordsman. He also has the effect during your battle phase. You can reduce his attack by 600 and bump up the attack of any monster you control by 600 as long as it's a fire warrior type, which is every monster in this deck save for Fencing Fire Ferret. So really that can be useful, especially if you use his effect and then exceed with him. The effect still goes through, so that can be very useful. And lastly, your bailout monster in this deck is playing 2 blasters. Really, Blaster's essential when you're playing all of these fire monsters in the deck. You have a lot of opportunities to pitch cards to your graveyard with Blaster to destroy your opponent's monsters or cards. And there's a lot of targets that, if you pitch using Blaster's effect, are actually beneficial. Throwing Counterpunch into your graveyard is really costless for you, and say if you pitch a Glassjaw with Blaster's effect, not only are you destroying an opponent's monster, you're getting to add a boxer to your hand. And also you have so many fire targets you can begin banishing to get Blaster out in tight situations. Moving on to the spell portion, I have a few staples. Playing a Dark Hole, 2 MSTs is really important in this deck because you want to remove that back row. Any cards that would target or destroy some of your boxer monsters can really frog your jam as you're going through. So it's important to remove some of that back row going through. Next card I would recommend would be a Lightning Vortex. All you have to do is discard 1 card from your hand to destroy all face-up monsters your opponent controls. Like I said earlier, there's a lot of costless discards within this deck, whether it be Counterpunch, Glassjaw, or Rib Gardener, which will actually benefit you because, say, if you pitch that Glassjaw, you're getting a Boxer back to your hand. There's a lot of effective combinations, and it's really a minimal cost. Also, you can pitch a Blaster, and that's really not going to harm you in the long run. I also recommend playing a Book of Moon. It's a chance to flip down effect monsters. As we'll see later on, Lead Yolk can be susceptible to some effects that target him that don't destroy him, so this is a good way of defending some of your boxer monsters. Upstart Goblin, another one I'd recommend. Draw power is really what's lacking in this deck, and a lot of the options that are good draw power tend to be on the more spendy side. If you can afford it, look into getting a maxi, but an Upstart Goblin is definitely a cheap way to get some draw power within the deck, and giving your opponent 1,000 life points doesn't really hurt you all that much because you do have a lot of beaters in the deck. Rhoda is definitely a crucial card to play in the deck. Any opportunity to immediately get switch hit into your hand is very essential and will allow you to immediately get into your win condition that is Lead Yolk. Also, 2 Warrior Returning Lives. Being able to add boxer monsters from your graveyard to your hand and get plays going quickly is very crucial, and there's a number of cards that you can target with this. The next big Battlin boxer card is the one that came out in the most recent set, Spirits. I definitely recommend 2 or 3. All you have to do is mill the top card off of your deck, and you can special summon a boxer monster in face-up defense position. Spirits is really powerful in this deck because it is essentially an instant yoke, and also that opportunity to mill 1 card, once again, like we mentioned earlier. If you're milling a Blaster or a Counterpunch or a Glassjaw, it's really not hurting you in the long run. It can actually be very beneficial. So I definitely recommend multiple if you can find them. They're a little bit harder to find right now since the set is relatively new. The most expensive card you're probably going to run into when trying to build this deck is Rank Up Numeron Force. So this card is probably $3 or $4 a piece if you want to get it. It's not absolutely crucial, but it can get into some big plays. You would play this whenever you have a rank 4 exceed monster on the field. You can play this. It will negate all other face-up cards on the field, and you can special summon a rank 5 monster over your current rank 4. It can get you into some bigger monsters that are crucial late in game, and also it will negate the effects of all their face-up monsters, so it can really hurt your opponent's course of action after that. It can be a really crucial play. But once again, that's arguably the most expensive card in this deck build, and it's still only $3 or $4 a piece, so it's relatively affordable to put this one together. As for traps, Bottomless Trap Hole, D-Prison, Compulsory Evacuation Device, and Mirror Force are all just back row protection that are fairly useful and common in most decks. Play 1 Call of the Haunted, maybe. If you can go, I would recommend 3 Spirits and go without the Call of the Haunted because Spirits just is a quicker way of getting a monster out. And Call of the Haunted can clog your back row if you exceed with the monster that you called. But then again, it is an easier card to find. It's relatively cheap and one that you can go into fairly quickly to put the deck together. Magic Cylinder, certainly not the best option, but it is one that's relatively easy to find. You can inflict some damage to your opponent. There are ways to get around it, but it's still one way of hurting your opponent and protecting yourself. And then we have the OCG favorite. That's right, Raigeki Break. This card is a lot of fun to play just because it is from some of the older sets. Not a lot of people play it. But once again, that discard cost to you in this deck is not that bad. And you get to destroy a face-up card on the field, whether it be something that your opponent has in the back row or one of their boss monsters. A really crucial play and one that can be very effective. And the last 2 cards we're looking at in the main deck, Threatening Roar and Fiendish Chain. Threatening Roar is just a good way of saving yourself for one turn and protecting some of your monsters. Say you have a switch hitter out, you can Threatening Roar and make sure that you can get into a Lead Yoke that next turn. Fiendish Chain is also great because when you're facing, say, Constellars and you're going up against a Pallades, that's one of the things that could really harm your Lead Yoke build. So being able to Fiendish Chain them and lock up some of your opponent's effect monsters is really crucial. And effect protection is the one thing really that you have to worry about within this deck. Moving into the extra deck, start off, you have to go with your win condition. You're going to need a play set of Battlin, Boxer, Lead Yoke. Now this guy is basically what you're trying to get into on every single play. He's 2 level 4 Battlin Boxer monsters. When a Battlin Boxer monster you control would be targeted for destruction by battle or by card effect, you can detach an XYZ material from this card and save that monster. You can even target itself. And when you detach, the Battlin Boxer Lead Yoke gains 800 attack, meaning you can get this guy up to 3,800 attack on the field, and that doesn't even include the counter punches that you can pitch from your graveyard. Lead Yoke is really the crucial play and allows you a lot of control because you can protect so many of your own monsters. Like I said earlier, the thing you're going to want to focus on with your back row is effect protection to make sure that he hasn't targeted and spun back to your extra deck, because otherwise he can protect himself from destruction. You're certainly going to want to play at least one Battlin Boxer Star Cestus. He is a generic 3/4, so if you decide to go a different route with spamming out those level 4s, you can certainly play him. His effect, you can detach and negate an attack declared on one of your Battlin Boxing monsters, or negate the effects of the monster that declares the attack, rather, and your opponent takes the battle damage. Also, your boxing monster is not destroyed. So Star Cestus is a very solid play if you can get him out there, and he's got that protective ability like Lead Yoke. He's a little more difficult to get out, but there are a lot of combinations you can use in this deck to play him. Then, if you rank up Numeron for Star Cestus, you get out Battlin Boxer Comet Cestus, and this guy is very crucial within this deck. He can make a lot of big plays. So when you attack and destroy one of your opponent's monsters, you can inflict damage to your opponent equal to half of the monster's attack on the field, and that's just its normal effect. If you have Star Cestus as one of the materials, once per turn you can detach from this card, target a monster your opponent controls, and destroy it. If you do that, you inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack of the destroyed monster on the field. So not only with Comet Cestus can you destroy your opponent's monster and inflict that damage of the attack to your opponent, you can then still attack on that same turn and inflict a lot of damage to your opponent's monsters. Definitely one worthwhile. Play one because it is a little bit hard to get out because you have to have that rank up Numeron force, but it's certainly a good monster in this deck. And the last Battlin Boxer XYZ card is the one that they released in the newest set, Boxer Cheat Commissioner. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this card in the main deck because it is, or in the extra deck, because it is harder to play. It's more for trolling your opponent than anything. It cannot be targeted for attack as long as you control another boxer. If your opponent declares an attack, you can detach both materials from this card and then look at your opponent's hand, set one of their spell cards to your back row. So, Cheat Commissioner can be effective in some plays. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of level 3 boxer monsters aside from Rib Gardna and Rabbit Puncher as well as Counter Punch, but those aren't usually cards you're going to want to have in your main deck. You theoretically could Tour Guide into him, but he's not really an essential target for this deck. Next for your rank 4s, you're going to want to have Comics Hero Legend Arthur, as well as the rank 5 monster that you can get into Numeron Force with. It's two very good monsters that you can get out in the case that you're running low on Lead Yokes, or if you're exceeding with Blue Flame Swordsman or Fencing Fire Ferret, or any other non-boxer monster you decide to target. He's a good option, has similar effects to Comet Cestus. Another rank 4 you consider going with is Heroic Champion Excalibur. Once again, only a couple of bucks if you can find him. Once per turn, you can detach 2 XYZ materials from this card and double its original attack. So you basically will have a 4,000 attack monster until your opponent's next end phase, which is good for protection or just getting over one of your opponent's big monsters. Certainly a good play, and having one of them is definitely useful in this deck. Next, I'd recommend one Masquerade, as well as the rank 5 composite, the Umbral Horror Masquerade. Now, Masquerade is a 3/4. He's a little bit difficult to get out, But if you can, during your opponent's battle phase, you can detach to negate the effect, the activation of a monster, opponent's effect monster, and then inflict 800 damage to your opponent. So Masquerade can be very cool if you can get him out in combination with Lead Yoke. You have a lot of control over your opponent. But if you can rank up Numeron Force into Umbral Horror Masquerade, you've essentially won the duel here. Horror Masquerade has the ability to negate the activation of any monster effect that your opponent tries to activate, and if you successfully negate it, you get to destroy the monster, discard a card from your opponent's hand, and half your opponent's life points. Horror Masquerade can be a game winner on his own if you can get him out. He's a little more difficult to get out, and it is a situational play. That's why I would only take up the 2 spots in the extra deck with these 2 cards, but they're certainly ones that lend you a lot of control when you're spamming out your rank 4s. And the last 2 you're going to want to look to are your fairly staple card, your number 39 Utopia, who has the ability to negate attacks, and Utopia Ray 5, who also has the ability to detach, target an opponent's monster, and destroy, inflict the original attack to your opponent. Similar to some of the other monsters, it has less attack, so I wouldn't recommend going into that as a primary option, but it's certainly one that you can get into a lot with this deck, and can swing the tide of a duel. Lastly, just a couple of extra deck cards you might want to consider. Flying Sea and Confronting the Sea are fairly anti-meta in that you can special summon them. Flying Sea, you can special summon to your opponent's side of the field when they normal summon, and it prevents them from XYZ summoning. It can be really good against some decks. Confronting the Sea, you can special summon to your side when your opponent XYZ or X summons a monster from the extra deck, and it cannot be targeted by the Exceed monster's effect. So these 2 can be pretty useful in messing up a lot of decks' flow. Dark World Dealings is one you might want to consider because, as we've discussed before, pitching a card isn't really all that negative, so you can draw and then pitch. It provides you with pseudo draw power within the deck, but it can be pretty useful. It's something you might want to consider. Also, these 2 cards here, Special Hurricane and Divine Wrath. Special Hurricane, once again, it's a discard 1 card from your hand for the cost, and you can destroy all special summoned monsters on the field. So this is crucial because when you have Lead Yoke out, you can detach, and he would not be destroyed by this effect. He'd gain 800 attack, and you destroy all special summon monsters on your opponent's side of the field, which is many of the current cards that are in most meta decks. Divine Wrath allows you to discard its quick activate trap, and you can negate the activation of an effect monster's effect, so it provides a little bit more of that effect protection for your Lead Yokes, and is a really useful card with a minimal cost to this deck. So that's the build. It's one of those budget options. It's one that, as long as you can find the cards for it, it's fairly cheap to put together, and a fairly competitive and fun deck to play.